things I need to get out the way before this video. Number one, the UK is currently experiencing a heatwave, so my window is open, so I apologise if you can hear any random background noises. Unfortunately, it's out of my control. I could shut my window, but that is not happening. And number two, my hair's changed again. Chernobyl is one of the worst nuclear disasters to ever occur in history, ever. The fact that this disaster could have wiped out and poisoned the whole of the population is such an insane concept to me, and the fact that we still don't really have that many answers to the questions is also insane. I also feel the need to mention that Chernobyl is a weird obsession of mine. I'm obsessed with it. That's really weird to say, but like, it's one of my big interests. I love researching about it. I've rewatched the HBO series so many times that I could probably say it line for line. So I thought, you know what? Time to make a video about it. But in this video, rather than talk about the events leading up to it and sort of what happened, I thought we could have a look at the horrors of Chernobyl rather than the disaster itself. I mean, of course I'm going to explain what happened anyway, because this would be pretty useless for those that really don't have a clue. That's right, Jasmine, I'm talking to you. But I'm not going to be getting too sciencey on you, so don't worry about it. I thought we could just have a little bit of a talk about the disaster, the weird things that happened, what happened afterwards, and keep it relatively light-hearted while also being as respectful as I possibly humanly can. I'm going to be cracking a few jokes here and there, but of course, time and place, I don't want to upset anybody, but keep that in mind. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's just get straight into this video. So if you are unsure or live under a rock, the reason I'm saying this is because my best friend had no idea what Chernobyl was. She had never heard of it in her 20 years of life? Almost 21. I'll scratch the surface of what Chernobyl is and what happened just so you have a reminder or that idea in your head. You know, you can come to your own conclusions. So the word Chernobyl refers to two things. Chernobyl was a city, but the word Chernobyl also, you know, refers to this disaster. Now, Chernobyl was a relatively unknown city in northern Ukraine, just near the border of Belarus. But on the 26th of April 1986, not that long ago, might I add, a disaster occurred that could have literally cost the whole planet. Now, Chernobyl, of course, was a power plant, and at the reactor number 4, so there was 4 different reactors, and at reactor number 4, workers were ordered to carry out a safety test of the reactor. Now, this test was supposed to check if the reactor could still be cooled during a power outage using backup generators. Now, if you haven't watched the HBO series, I highly recommend you do, but also take some of the things that happen in that series with a pinch of salt, but we'll come back to that in a moment. But I highly recommend you watch it, because they do a way better job at explaining it than I'm gonna do. But again, I'm still gonna try my best to. So the test was poorly planned, to say the least, and the reactor had been running at low power for quite some time. The test was supposed to happen on the day shift, but it ended up happening on the night shift. Now, when a reactor begins running at low power, it starts to build up. I think it's a build-up of xenon, which is essentially a poison, and it basically makes the reactor extremely unstable. And whilst this test was bound to happen, several of the critical safety systems were disabled on purpose, because it was a test, you know. They don't want these safety alarms going off because they're doing a test. Like, it would just, no point. The reason the alarms would be going off would be because they were doing a test, you know? So they turned them off because they didn't want to hear the alarms beeping every 5 seconds. I mean, okay, fair enough. So after the test was conducted, again, this test was done poorly, they tried to shut down the reactor by pressing the AZ5 button. Now, this button was supposed to be an emergency shut-off. However, when the men in this power plant pressed the button, the reactor exploded. It exploded. It experienced a power surge and exploded. And the reason for this is because the tips on the rods that go into the reactor had graphite tips. Now, graphite is what it's very, when it comes with a reactor, it's the thing that I have no science background, guys. I do apologise if I'm butchering this explanation. The control rods went back into the reactor, too much all at once, it exploded. That's all you need to know. It caused extreme heat, which caused the fuel rods to rupture, and the reactor exploded. And the explosion was so powerful that it blew off the 1,000-ton steel concrete lid and spewed radioactive material into the air. Graphite, which can only be found inside of the reactor, the most radioactive material on Earth because it had been inside the reactor, was just out on the streets. Outside, all over the floor and the roof of the building. That was the proof that the reactor had exploded. Now, when this thing had exploded, a lot of the higher-ups were very like, it's not exploded, it's not graphite. You're insane. It's just the feed water going around the core. The core's still intact. The core was very much not intact. The core was actually polluting the entirety of the world. The core was spreading radioactive dust and smoke across the whole continent of Europe. Now, when this happened, the Soviets claim that the death toll is just 31. We'll come back to this. Now, of course, from what we know now, this problem was solved by so many amazing people, like the scientists, the liquidators, all of the people that came, the nurses, the doctors that helped, all of the people that came together to clean up this fucking sheds mistakes. By sheds, I mean the Soviet government. We'll talk more about those in a moment because those guys were just thrown off to the side. But first of all, I feel like it's important to talk about the effects that radiation has on the body, okay, so we can get an idea of the kind of crisis that we're dealing with. Now, first of all, trigger warning, because this might be a little bit gross. Now, of course, depending on the type of radiation, such as gamma radiation, and the dosage that the body receives. So when you go for an X-ray, that dosage of radiation that you receive, perfectly safe, perfectly normal. It's not actually going to do anything to your body. It's okay. But for example, if you were a worker inside a nuclear power plant and the reactor explodes, you are cooked. You're cooked. Literally and metaphorically, you are cooked. The workers inside the power plant were exposed to an extremely high amount of radiation, but not for super long, but for long enough. In the first hours to days, the workers would have experienced acute radiation sickness, and this would include nausea, sickness, diarrhea, fatigue, headaches, skin burns that were extremely similar in appearance to sunburns. But then a couple of days later, they would experience something called the latent phase. Now, this is why radiation poisoning is so cruel, because the latent phase would make the patient seem like they were getting better. Their skin would heal, their overall appearance would look better, they would feel better. Only for a day later, they would rapidly decline. They would begin to experience immune system failures, organ damage, collapses. Their skin would begin to melt off their bodies. Their veins, capillaries, arteries would just disintegrate. So a needle to administer morphine couldn't even be inserted for the pain. And then, of course, after days of pure agony, they would finally die. But in this case, the sweet release of death would have been what a lot of these men were praying for. And women, of course. But for the people of Chernobyl and Pripyat, which is the nearest city to Chernobyl, they wouldn't have been exposed to as much radiation as the power plant workers. However, they would have still been exposed to enough for a whole 500 lifetimes of a person. And they still stayed in the city of Pripyat for 36 hours before they were even evacuated. Now, lots of these people would have experienced horrendous cancers, thyroid cancers in particular, leukemia, lung cancers, breast cancers. They would have also suffered birth defects. Lots of men were becoming infertile because of the damage of radiation. And this is because radiation causes the DNA to change and even, mutate. Radiation causes damage in the eyes, and this can lead to vision problems and blindness. But of course, thankfully, there was lots of treatments available that could sort of help the sort of lesser symptoms, but the workers, they were cooked. And of course, treatment is not a cure, but the treatments included bone marrow transplants, potassium iodine to stop your thyroid from absorbing the unstable iodine, as well as decontamination processes for all of the workers. But essentially, all you need to know that radiation is very, very, very dangerous when it's not controlled. Because radiation and nuclear energy can be used for good, it can be used for great things, but in this situation, It was not. Now, of course, the Soviets actually attempted to cover up this entire situation from happening. They tried their hardest to just sweep it under the rug. I fully think that if the situation wasn't as bad as it was, we probably wouldn't have known about it. So, a little bit of a history lesson. The Soviet Union at the time was already under a ton of pressure because the Cold War was ongoing, the economy was struggling, and basically they wanted to come across like they had everything under control. They wanted to come across as the big, feared, Billy Big Bollocks of the world. And could you imagine how they would look if the world found out that their nuclear reactor had exploded and essentially poisoned the entire world? I feel like making this video at this current time while we're at threat of nuclear war was probably not a good idea. I do apologise. How can you be scary and powerful when your nuclear reactor has just exploded, you know? Essentially, the Soviets admitting of this up would make them look like the beta cook male, you know? And they were not having that. So what did they do? They covered it up, and they even denied it happened to the people that witnessed it. They scolded workers who told them that graphite was on the ground. They just lied and lied. They told these workers that they were crazy, nothing had happened, you guys, and then they tried to blame it on the workers, because it wasn't even their fault. But at first the officials didn't actually understand the extent of the explosion and the radiation release because they were so far up their own fucking arses. And the funny thing is, the reason we actually found out about the disaster was because other countries were detecting radiation in the air. Sweden, which is 1,000 kilometers away from Chernobyl, had radiation alarms going off. And even when they were caught by American satellite photos that it had exploded, they still denied it! They still didn't even admit it! They delayed informing their own people and the global committee because they were just scared a panic was going to erupt. Good! Panic! And then when information did begin to leak, they still tried to twist it to their own narrative. They were trying to just be vague and misleading. And people were told that it was just the roof that was on fire and that it was absolutely nothing to worry about. And everyone, including engineers, plant managers, and local authorities, were all pressured to downplay the problems to the people that were asking about them, often leading to false reports being passed up to the chain of command. But it is believed that this disaster is the catalyst of the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, because absolutely no one was believed and the government was so desperate to sweep it under the rug, they didn't even bother to evacuate anywhere. They just didn't understand how horrendous the situation was. And the funny thing is, as soon as other countries began to find out about the explosion, so for example Germany, people in Germany stopped their children from going outside. They wouldn't let their kids go to school. They kept them home because of the fear of the radiation. And the people in Pripyat were just going on like business as normal, while their power plant was emitting radiation into the air. It just goes to show how much the Soviets just didn't really care about the people. There had never been a disaster of this kind of magnitude before, and the scale of radiation that was released was completely unprecedented. They truly believed that this could have been fixed and controlled so easily, and really the citizens should have been evacuated as soon as the building exploded. And funnily enough too, lots of the dosimeters, I keep wanting to call them dosimeters, dosimeters. Lots of the dosimeters that are used to measure radiation were giving a reading of 3.6 Rontgen, which is a horrendous amount of radiation within itself, and that's still pretty horrific. It's pretty horrendous, the equivalent to 400 chest x-rays, apparently. That's what I've been told. But the dosimeters that they were provided would only go as high as 3.6 Rontgen. So they were just giving the number that they had. The real measurement was 15,000 Rontgen, which is insane. And it wasn't until the evening of the 27th of April, a day and a half later, because the reactor exploded at 1 in the morning on the 26th of April, they finally began to evacuate Pripyat. But by then the damage was already done because thousands and thousands of people had already absorbed a significant amount of radiation, and the delay contributed to long-term health problems that many of the survivors still face today. Now, one of the true mysteries of Chernobyl is the death toll itself. The Soviets claim that the death toll stands at just 31 people, with 2 dying immediately at the scene and 29 others dying from radiation-related illnesses in the weeks following. So that would be like the firefighters, the power plant workers, and so on. However, this is not the case. The number is likely between 4,000 to 90,000 deaths. It's believed that this number is just a huge cover-up, as it doesn't include anyone that died after a certain threshold. And sources such as the World Health Organization estimates that the real number is so much higher. And that's because radiation exposure from the fallout affected people from all around the world. It affected people from Ukraine, Belarus, parts of Russia, leading to increases in thyroid cancer, leukemia, and other illnesses, especially among children and the cleanup workers, which were known as liquidators. The medical records were often incomplete or classified information, so no one can get access to them. And deaths from radiation were sometimes labelled as unrelated health issues to keep the numbers low. Of course, this has helped fuel the lasting belief that thousands of the early deaths were covered up by official figures who just wanted to save their asses. And there are some insane conspiracy theories surrounding the deaths, and some of them believe that even hundreds of thousands of people were buried in unmarked graves to hide the full impact of the disaster. Now, in regards to the deaths, a common misconception about Chernobyl is that lots of people died on a bridge while watching the radioactive dust fall from the sky. It's spoken about in the Chernobyl TV series, and in this they say that all of the people on the bridge that watched the dust fall, all of them died. But is that true? Well, no one really knows. Many people from Pripyat walked to this bridge during the night and early morning hours to get a better view of the glow of the reactor, which little did they know it was fucking radiation in the air. I had no idea how dangerous it was, and the wind patterns would have blown the dust over the bridge. But people on the bridge aware of the danger were directly exposed to this level of radiation. Keep in mind, the reactor had literally just exploded. There is no official record or confirmation proving that every person on this bridge died. Now, you could either look at this with your tinfoil hat or you can look at it without your tinfoil hat, but either way, they're both actually pretty likely for once. It's sort of an urban legend, if you will. Still likely that some people did die from being on that bridge, years later, of course, to radiation illnesses. The bridge itself still stands today, but of course, it's still abandoned like the rest of Pripyat. Pripyat is still abandoned. No one has been there since, and it's probably going to remain that way for the rest of our lives because it's so radioactive. But of course, lots of witnesses on the bridge have also come forward and said, I was on the bridge, I'm still alive, and I'm fine. But you have to take everything with a pinch of salt coming out of this because of the lies and just the bullshit that came from it. You know, no one really knows. But I would like to know where HBO felt confident enough to put that in their whole TV show that they'd very well researched, by the way. Like, it's a very well researched TV show. It's really good. But it just plants that seed of doubt. Why would they feature that if they weren't 100% sure about it? And it's very common online to find that there are no records of it. Hey, did you know that Chernobyl houses the most radioactive thing ever to be created on Earth? And this is known as the elephant's foot. So the elephant's foot is a large solid mass of molten nuclear fuel, core reactor materials, sand and metal that formed beneath reactor number 4 after the explosion. Now, it's got its nickname because of its lumpy grey-like texture and appearance, and it does kind of look like an elephant foot. But the thing is, when it was first discovered, it was so radioactive that being near it for more than just a few seconds, few minutes, would result in instant death. Certain death, sorry, not instant death. You wouldn't die on the floor and melt away. You would wish you had, though. Within just 30 seconds of being near the elephant's foot, a person would be exposed to a lethal dose of radiation. Even taking a photograph of this mass was impossible. You know, the early images were so blurry and grainy because the radiation was damaging the camera equipment. And the liquidators, also known as like the cleanup crew, risked their lives trying to locate the elephant's foot. I've just gone really dizzy. I coughed and I've just gone so dizzy. Sorry guys. I'm fine. And they had to do research on the elephant's foot. They had to study it. They had to work out how much Rontgens it was releasing per hour, which was 10,000, by the way. It could still, you know, how much fuel was left. It's just so mad that people had to do this shit to protect the entirety of humanity, because let me tell you, if this wasn't stopped and if these people weren't brave enough to do it, we would all be dead. There were just so many different random lies told about Chernobyl, and the more extreme conspiracy theories surrounding it is that Chernobyl was not just a power plant, but that it was tied to military experiments and secret weapons research. Now, of course, when you have anything that's related to nuclear power, that's a given. You know, people like to throw that one out there. Whether or not it's true, I can't say, but they like to think that this explosion was the result of something more sinister. Of course, these claims have no credible evidence and they're very unsupportive, but they still persist. And that's partly because of how the Soviet military-industrial complex was at the time. And not only that, the exclusion zone surrounding Chernobyl, which of course includes Pripyat, which you can visit, by the way. Now, would I like to visit it? Yeah, but would I ever? Probably not. Definitely not, actually. But there is many, like, bizarre stories and folklore tales coming out of there with, like, mutated animals and ghost towns and spirits and other supernatural sightings known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Now, while it is true that lots of animals still remain there and have, unfortunately, mutated, there's only so much radiation can do, okay? I don't doubt for a second that it's haunted. Absolutely. That's some bad energy. But again, going back to the liquidators, official records downplay how many of them died and became sick. And it's just, you know, it puts that seed of doubt in lots of people's mind of what really happened? You know, what's really going on there? And that's perfectly valid because the source isn't that credible either. But regardless, today the ghost city of Pripyat stands frozen in time and the elephant's foot is still currently smouldering its radiation. Yeah. Now, of course, today Chernobyl does have a dome placed over it, which is set to last, I think, about 100 years, but it will have to be replaced, so that means it's probably going to have to come off for them to put a new one on. But yeah, it's still very, very radioactive today. That whole area cannot be, you know, accessed. But of course, that is where we stand today with just something so horrendous still being around. It's terrifying. But unfortunately, that is all the time I have for this video. I also just need to say something because this is crazy. I'm seeing all these TikTok edits and like posts about me and how I'm like people's favourite YouTubers. There was one and it was like I was featured in like someone's personal top 10 list, and on that list was like Vanilla Mace and Curtis Connor. What an honour it is to be compared to those legends. I just want to say like a huge thank you to everyone because I'm really close to 40k subscribers and it's like I'm getting emotional. Why am I crying? Why am I getting emotional? It's really not that deep, but like it's just so crazy. This is like something I've always wanted to do. It's something that I just love doing. I love creating content, making videos, and people actually watch it and enjoy it, and like and I make people's day by making content, and it's just so crazy. What the fuck? I think I'm starting my period, guys, okay? But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know. If you have any comments or you just want to say hi, leave it down below as I read every single comment. If you want to follow me on Instagram, please do, as I post daily updates of my life and videos. But yeah, until the next video, stay safe and stay away from radiation. Bye!